Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins, and it's an absolute pleasure to be joined today by Jenny Li Fowler. Jenny is the social media strategy expert at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She's the director of social media. But rather than me tell you all about Jenny and her wonderful career, I'm going to hand straight over to you, Jenny. Maybe tell our audience, our worldwide audience today, a little bit about who you are, what you do, and of course, the wonderful world that you work in, because it's a fast-moving industry, social media.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So thank you, Simon, for having me on. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you. Yeah, so I am the person that's 100% dedicated to social in the Institute Office of Communications. So I initiate and create the strategy and execute any sort of element of a communication plan that deals with social media at the presidential level and at the institute level. I manage all of the institute's flagship social media channels, and I also help to consult and advise all of our other social media managers at MIT. So as you can imagine, we have like 200 departments, labs, and centers, probably more by now, and they all have their own social media presence. And so I'm here to just make sure and to answer any of the questions that they might have, to talk and think through strategy and content strategy, and just to make sure, all of our institute social media channels are on sort of the level that we want them to be. Yeah.
Well, that's with all the different labs and all the different social media accounts and platforms that we have today, you've made something very complex sound very easy, but I'm sure behind the scenes, it takes a lot of work, Jenny.
Yeah, I think it just depends on your approach. It can be like herding cats, but I don't, my philosophy is that I don't police anyone. I'm just here to acknowledge or amplify or help all of our social media managers. So I'm a resource. So if they want to pick my brain and just kind of like start talking strategy from the start, I'm here to help them like soup to nuts, right? But also if they want to do their own thing, that's fine, but they just might not get as much like amplification or just kind of like community help from the larger social media community at MIT as they might normally get. And it's a huge asset. I think the whole community is an asset.
Yeah, I think being the director of social media strategy at MIT, there's lots of areas I'm sure that you're involved in, but you're no stranger to this world, because I know you served as the editor-in-chief, didn't you, at State Farm's Auto Learning Center. And you're also looking after social media and, I suppose, web editing for the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. So you're no stranger to this area.
Yeah, no, I'm I'm in this social media manager Slack group for Boston universities. And, we were kind of joking about, all of the new platforms that were coming out. And, someone kind of joked and said, I want to transport back to 2013. And I said, just for funsies, what were we all doing in 2013? And I mentioned that I was at Harvard Kennedy School. And then all of the other social media managers started chiming in, and they said I was like a sophomore in high school. I was a junior in high school. And someone said I was in middle school. And I was like, what? And so I think I kind of realized, yeah, I'm a senior in this business. And then someone did mention, they were like, no, not senior, pioneer. So I said, okay, you're my favorite. So yeah, I think I've sort of grown along with it. And a lot of times we were building the airplane as we were flying it. And in a sense, we still are. But at the onset and in the beginning, there was nothing but organic social media, and then it became monetized. And so I think from the start, I've always seen organic social media work. And to tell you the truth, that's all that I've done, So I think if you started in the industry when there was paid, it's really easy, to say organic is dead. You have to do paid, and then I always respond with, no, organic isn't dead. It's just difficult. It's hard to do because you're really relying on good content and listening to your audiences for them to tell you what they like and what they don't like and how they're feeling. And it really kind of takes a lot of paying attention. So I think that if you have like a solid strategy, you can like really stand, to take the changes and go with all of the new platforms that come out. And you can really like stand firm when all of that happens because your strategy is strong, right? And every platform has its own nuances and communities and takes its own content, and you can kind of make all those decisions and as you go and adapt. But if your strategy is strong, then you can just really you can roll with everything that comes your way because you've got a strong strategy. And I really, really believe that. And once you have like a good organic presence, I think that helps you with your paid ad or, like the paid side even more, because you have a better idea of what works, what you want to budget and how you want to budget things. And it just gives you a better idea because you really get to know your audience really well.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there, Jenny. And my brain has gone to so many questions I want to ask you here, but I'm going to back up a little bit and just at the time of recording, we've got Twitter transition to X.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen Threads launch from Meta, which went from 0 to 100 million users pretty much in the blink of an eye.
Overnight, yeah.
But you're talking about something that's always been around, which is organic content.
Yes.
Even today, at the time of recording, this might be different when people are listening to this in the future, but at the time of recording, Threads isn't monetized, even though there's over 100 million people using the platform.
Yes.
It seems to be quite a friendly place. I hope that remains to be the case. X is going through a whole other type of transformation under Elon Musk. But when it comes to organic and paid, this discussion, I know that you take a very strategic approach when it comes to an organic presence. And you mentioned a couple of key words that really stuck with me, which is it comes down to really listening. That was the first thing. And it comes down to creating great content that adds value, that's meaningful. And I've seen this a lot, and I'm sure you have too, Jenny, where people just put money behind social media. And it actually gets a bit of a backlash sometimes because people don't like things just appearing in their feed or their thread or it just kind of pops up and it's not that relevant to them. Whereas organic, if it's well thought through, if you're listening and if you're actually creating content that adds value, it seems to have really good cut through. And I loved what you said, and I'm going to hand this question back to you in a moment, but I loved what you said about, because I hear it too. Oh, organic's dead. You've got to put money behind it. It has to be paid social, otherwise you're going to get nowhere. And you're really evangelizing the fact that that's not quite true, to the point that you wrote a book about this. So could you tell me a little bit more about how you approach organic content, how you think about the importance of organic, and also maybe we can get into a little bit about the book and about building community on social media, because that's a very different approach.
Yes. It's all the same path, right? But it does, I think, come down to the listening aspect. So I think, for social for so long, we've been thinking about like what we're gonna push out, right? And what we're going to create and just kind of, but when you think of it from a space of you're trying to build communities, um, in any relationship, one of the most important elements is listening. Like any sort of relationship, meaningful relationship that you're trying to build, there's the listening aspect. And I think that we've forgotten about it, and that's largely been missing in the social media space. And so when people think of engagement or engaging their audience, they always think of like, how many times are you going to respond to them, or if you're going to respond to them, or, what your policy is on kind of commenting on comments, but it's not always the talking. I really like to press upon the fact that it's what are they saying? What are they telling you? It's really important to listen. For just, this is just a small example, but our audience during the pandemic, it was a really, really tough time, right? And they were saying so in social media. They would say how much they missed campus, or how much they missed the libraries, or how much they, were longing to be back. And so, one approach could have been to like respond to everyone individually, but what we ended up doing was we just created content that kind of shows everyone we're listening to them. And so we did this post, and with our mascot in a mask, but we said, we miss you too, a lot. And so it's not just the fact that we said we miss you, but we're saying we miss you too, like we're responding to. So it's like sort of those small things that inform your content, that that can, change your tactics, alter your approach, but it shows that you're listening to your audience. And during this time, it was really like, like I said, it was a tough time. So our tone changed, our vocabulary changed. We didn't say like happy or have a nice weekend. We didn't just kind of throw things out there. We really kind of adapted our content to show where we were in that moment, to let our audience know we knew what they were feeling and going through. So I think that when you're really listening to your audience, they'll tell you like what they're feeling, what triggers them, what trigger words are, like it all stems upon the fact that you're really listening. And that's what sort of builds a more authentic and, real feeling connection with your audience, and more importantly, they with you. And so that just kind of like, that's the start of it, right? And then you grow that, and it becomes a flourishing community.
Now, there's a great book I hear by this author called Jenny Li Fowler, and it's called Organic Social Media: How to Build Flourishing Online Communities.
Mhm.
So could you tell us a little bit about why you wrote the book, how it's going, what the process was like, and if people obtain the book, what can they find inside it, Jenny? What does it really get
Sure.
into?
Yeah, for sure. So, I get it. The book is sort of a culmination of all the questions I get asked over and over and over again. And I think I just, it was time, I guess it was time to write it down. But it's really just a framework for creating a strategy for social, no matter what, if it's for a specific campaign, or if it's for a new platform, or if it's your overall strategy in general. It's just a solid framework that has worked for me time and again, no matter really what industry I've been in, right? And along the way, I give like tips and like thoughts on people are always asking me, how do you gain buy-in with leadership? How do you gain trust? And it's just, I weave that in, and all into consideration. Or, if you've had to have like conversations that might be difficult, like taking personal time off, because if you're a social media manager and you want longevity in this profession, you're gonna feel burnout if you don't, create boundaries for yourself. So I address that too, so I give conversation points on how, if you have to have difficult conversations, and how I've gone about addressing those things. So it's sort of like build, what you really, all of the things you need to create a really, really solid strategy, and sort of like tips to stay in this profession and grow in it, and how we can grow the profession together. Because a lot of times, social media has matured, social media has grown, but the social media manager positions, the job descriptions are still from like 2001. And so that's why we haven't been able to maybe further the position as much, because every time there's a new person walking in the door, they get this job description from 2001. So they're doing everything, right? And it's not just Facebook and Twitter anymore. It's so much more. So, I talk about that a little bit, about how we can go about when we get to a job, how we can rewrite our job descriptions, how we can sort of change the expectations and change the conversation, so we can mature these positions as well, which is something I've done. At Harvard Kennedy School, I, changed the job description, changed my title. At MIT, we changed my job description. I went from manager to being a director. So it takes effort, but I think it's worth it, for all of us. And when I say all of us, like, I mean social media managers, and, because I'm really rooting for those that are coming into the profession, to have more clout and have more trust walking through the door, and a better understanding of what the position takes day to day, for those that they report to understand those things.
Yeah, I really like that, Jenny, because the human side, you mentioned things like burnout, but you also mentioned things like changing the job description and repositioning it within the organization. And I know within the book, you also talk a little bit about how social media managers, social media directors, they can really help an organization's growth objectives, can't they, if they set this up properly? Could you maybe talk to that a little bit, and also how maybe social media ambassadors and building community plays a part in that, helping the wider organization?
Sure. So, one thing I do talk a lot about, in the book, which is a huge, element in strategy, is goal settings, because you need goals, right? Your goals are your guardrails. If not, you have no guardrails, and so it's easy to go off the rails, right? So, and a lot of times, I think it gets you can't, people don't get the goal setting part right, because either the goals seem too big or lofty, they're too aspirational, and you just can't, like, we want to make a better world, right? Everyone, like, I feel like everyone has that goal, but I, like, in my book, I help people think through, like, if it's aspirational, then what can you do to support that lofty goal? So, you can, you can say that, our company recycles this much, and this is how much we're green, and that's our part in play in I'm just throwing this out there, but in making a better world. And if you take that fact and help share it on your social media channels, if and what you're doing in that space, if that's something that's important to your audience, then play up that space, and so then you're helping to hit that goal. Not only that, you can kind of get numbers to help with the ROI. Like, so you can say, we posted 209 pieces of content this past year or this past month, whatever it would be, to help support of this goal. I think a lot of times we're in communications, and communications goals are they're very like squishy, right? Like, we don't have like sales numbers we're talking about like messaging, and if our messaging is going through. So, I always, one thing I've been really telling social media managers is the number of content that you share, the pieces of content you share, that's an actual number you can share, or, remember anecdotal evidence is really important too. So make sure you screenshot things where people are saying comments about, wow, I didn't know your company did so much to to recycle, but that's sort of like a point to, a data point to say our messaging is going through, right? So, but yes, so we talk about how you can kind of break down goals, and so you have clear cut goals to work with, and that really sort of helps shape the objectives of the larger, like that you're supporting the objectives of the corporation, of the company. When you do build a really loyal audience, they're all ambassadors for your, for your brand. They'll talk about you at parties, like, oh, hey, I read this, or did you know this? And they might not say it's from your social media channel, but that's okay, because they're sharing their experience of how they're interacting with your brand in these spaces, right? And I always say, like, even your lurkers are loyal members too. Like, they might not always feel like they need to contribute or like or engage with your content, but they're reading it, right? They're reading it and they're sharing it. They're taking that into real life places and spaces and connections. And so, if you grow stronger relationships, connections, they translate and they go into real world settings, and they're all your ambassadors, right? And so I think it's just important. Like, I'm always thinking about our audience and how they view or consume, or how something might hit them, because I'm always thinking about it from their side. What would I like? What would make me stop for this piece of content, or what would make me laugh? Yeah, I'm always thinking it from their side.
Well, thank you, Jenny, for sharing that, because a couple of things you've said there, I really like. I love the term squishy numbers. I thought that was brilliant. I haven't heard that phrase before, but I think when you talk about, and I see this, sometimes people that are engaged in this social media activity and trying to put standard metrics that other parts of the organization or the senior leadership understand, sometimes it's not the same, because they are, in inverted commas, squishy. And you do have to look for those, whether it's that screenshot that you mentioned, where you can actually showcase, look, our message is reaching people. This is the kind of feedback we're getting.
Mhm.
I've been talking a lot recently about looking for signals of intent or signals of engagement, which is maybe quite different to, say, a company that's trying to develop very hard sales leads, for example, through their social media activity, or to attract more people to come to the educational institution. But being able to show signals of intent, being able to screenshot those real-time interactions, I think is a good way of being able to demonstrate how the message is carried through. And the other thing that you said that I didn't want to let just go by, I thought lurkers, where people are, it sounds like such a bad term, but people are just
Yeah, it
watching, right?
does.
People are just watching.
Yes, yes.
And I often feel as though sometimes we get so carried away with the metrics that we forget that just because somebody doesn't interact with a post or a piece of social media, or repost, or add a comment, or share it, that doesn't necessarily mean they haven't seen it. And I'm not just talking about impressions for impression's sake, but there is that sort of wider acknowledgement that these lurkers and inverted comments, they're still your audience. They're still part of your community, aren't they?
100%. Yeah. I mean, maybe we can call them the introverts in the audience, just because your extroverts are, the ones that are always liking everything, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have read the piece of content or have really, seen it, but on the other hand, your introverts, they're really taking it in and they're following you because they love your content and they love, the vibe of your brand. And, sometimes they're the biggest evangelists. Just because you're not there to witness it, it doesn't mean that it doesn't count, right? And just to go back to what you were saying about leadership, I think it's really important for you, even though they're not asking for it. And I go this into my book as well, but, to give them good news, like say, this post, like give them bits and pieces of good news. And so that when you have to give them bad news, which will 100% happen, they will be more open to it, because they've seen your name in their inbox, and you've kind of given them little nuggets of good news where they know that you're the person at the helm of the social media channels, and that what you're doing, that when stuff happens that isn't is the crisis will happen. And so the first time they hear from you, it's not bad news, and they'll be more ready to hear it, because they'll be familiar with who you are. So that's a relationship building, angle too, and why that's so important. And I again, I talk about this in my book. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's sage advice, Jenny, that, it's that recognition of the work that's being done, isn't it? It's that, let's just share some good news, because there will come a time when it's not the great news or the great response, whether that's a crisis that happens or something you have to respond to in real time in
100%.
communication. It will come up. So it's nice to have established that relationship, particularly with the leadership or the management structure within your organization. I want to change gear in a moment, but before we do that, one thing I can't not ask you is about artificial intelligence, because a lot of content that is, in inverted commas, organic today is being helped, put together, enhanced, or maybe initially drafted using artificial intelligence today, whether it's Bard or, at the time of recording, GPT-4, or many of the other tools that are out there. Do you have any early views on this? Are you using AI as part of your own workflows? Or what's your view on this situation at the moment, Jenny?
Yeah, so this is something we're definitely exploring. I've always been, just personally, I've always been an early adopter of technology. I had a Palm Pilot and I loved my Palm Pilot, and sometimes I miss my Palm Pilot. And I work at MIT, so I just can't blanket it, say, oh no, no, like I think that there's definitely room for it. We're exploring these possibilities. Just early on, I think they're really, things like ChatGPT, it's really helpful to create, alternative text, like alt text, because that's an area I think where a lot of social media managers have. It's hard, creating alt text, it can be hard. And so I think if you can get a little of a jump start, I think that can be helpful. It's funny because everyone, this whole question of like, oh, will it take my job, or is it gonna, is it gonna make me necessary, in the future? And I still 100% say yes. And it's because there's so many nuances to social media where you can't, I don't know if you can mathematically like go through every little situation in every second, because the climate changes so fast. And I'll give you an example. I actually scheduled a post for like the end of the day, and it was a Friday, and it was a very, very, and I think I did it a little bit like later in the day, right? Or like I scheduled it for later in the evening. And it was just a really sort of pleasant dusk picture of campus. And and I said, have something like, have a lovely weekend, everyone, or enjoy your weekend, or something like that. Totally benign, how could that possibly go wrong? Well, I'll tell you how it can go wrong. So it posted, and then I think like a minute or two after I had scheduled that to post, news broke that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had passed away. And so, so when I saw that, I was first very sad. And then I went, my post, and I went to go check on it, and sure enough, there were already, it only had been out there for like a couple of minutes, and there were already posts that said bad timing, not this weekend, not a great look. And I deleted it. And so would AI know in that minute to go, oh no, this post that I scheduled, because it was a really, I don't know, it was just a total benign post. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Like, unless they have AI to know to read that can read every single comment that's coming in at the
Yeah.
same
I
time.
think it's a really interesting point, because that real-time communication, a lot of the models today work on the next word in the sentence, and does it make sense? And a lot of the LLMs that are around today, the data set stops, doesn't it, as we know, at 2021. Yes, you can use plugins. Yes, some of them now can pull in more recent data. But when a real-time event happens, being able to respond to that in real time, I'm not sure either. That's a great example and a great use case
Yeah.
where you need humans in the loop, don't you? And also something you spoke about earlier, which was about listening, and sort of coming at listening from an empathetic perspective, and understanding the human
So
emotion
important.
involved in the communication, I think is another element that humans are, we have it inbuilt. Machines do not. They learn over time styles and algorithms and wording, but they still don't have it inbuilt. It's a machine at the end of the
Well,
day, or it's an
yeah.
algorithm or a piece of code.
That's the thing. It's like it's like the emotional intelligence. Like, how do you teach artificial intelligence emotional intelligence? And I also go like into this in my book, at how important emotional intelligence is in this position, in being a social media manager. We're all in this moment, we're in this Barbenheimer moment, right? And so I kind of went down this rabbit hole of watching Chris Nolan interviews with Cillian Murphy. I mean, they're all just really creative, brilliant artists. And so I was watching this interview, and Christopher Nolan said for Oppenheimer, he said, he's like, CG was off the table. He said, I didn't want to use CG. And then he used this phrase that I literally, like, after he used it, I wrote on my whiteboard. He said, I wanted to use real world methodologies. And I was like, yes. And so he wanted, and he literally touched his chair. He's like, I wanted us to feel the bomb. I wanted us to see the bomb. And so, and he said that built up that feeling, or that in anxiety or stress even more. And I think all the artists felt that too. I said artists, but actors felt that too. And so I think, and this moment where we're talking, AI can do so much, and we're just, everyone's asking me about ChatGPT AI. We have this probably one of the best movies of our time, and the director is talking about tactile real world methodologies. And so I think that's going to be the difference, is that how it makes you feel, right? If it's from a human eye, if this picture is from a human eye at the perfect moment, at the golden hour, taken by a person, I think that's going to trigger different emotions than this beautiful image that AI creates, because it's artificial. I just really believe this. Maybe I'm naive, but I really feel that it's the emotion that makes it really different, and we will really start to feel that, I think, as we move forward with, all of the AI that is all around us.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I mean, I see, as I'm sure you do, the amount of AI imagery and art. And I mean, a lot of it is, I know there've been some very famous world photography competitions that have been won by AI art that's only been revealed later. Um, but ultimately coming down to emotion and that emotional component that we all have. A lot of the language models today, whether it's text to video, text to speech, artificial intelligence models like ChatGPT or others, they seem sentient because of the way that they're built, but they're not sentient.
Right.
They don't have that component. Now,
Right.
whether we get to that level or not, that's a whole other discussion. That's probably a really good thing and a really bad thing
Yeah.
rolled into one.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think you make some really excellent points there. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit about AI. So I know we can go down an AI rabbit hole, but it is something that everybody's working with today in one shape or another. And we're all getting lots of questions about it. So thank you, Jenny.
Yeah.
Um, to change gear, because I do want to ask you a few questions before we
Yeah.
finish up today, I like to ask the guests a few questions that sort of help our international audience understand a little bit more about the person.
Yeah.
And the first thing I'd like to ask you is about, obviously, with your role, like as a director of social media at MIT, you have to stay current. You have to keep abreast of what's happening, and it's changing very fast, your world. So
Mhm.
how do you onboard information? What's your learning style like? What sort of, are you constantly on social media? Are you watching YouTube videos? Are you reading documents and books? How does your onboarding information work in today's sort of complicated world, Jenny?
Yeah, no, for me, I always like to experience it firsthand. And so and I kind of share this story in my book, but I'm going to share it with you. Like I was getting a new phone, and you know how like they transfer all of the data from the old phone to the new phone, and then they're like, so, and the person looked at me, he's like, you have 289 apps on your phone. And I was like, is that a lot? Like I didn't know. I was like, is or whatever the number was, but he was just like, "Yeah, this is going to take a little bit of time. But when I hear of a new app or a new platform, the first thing I do is download it and I play around with it, and that's like sort of my way of learning. And then and if I think, oh, this is kind of a thing, or what, if I want to learn more about it, because you can learn really easily, like, oh, this is not for us, or I'll read more. I read a lot of newsletters in the industry, because it's true, it's hard. You can't be all in all the spaces all the time, but if you're in some of the spaces and you're reading about, like, if you're letting them, like the people who are writing the newsletters, kind of do a little bit of the curation for you, and then you can read about that. It's sort of helpful, and it keeps you abreast of everything, and talking. I'm a big believer in talking with peers in the industry. I'm in so many Slack groups and Discord groups with other social media managers, and I think we're constantly, engaged in conversation about, the climate and new platforms, because it's ever changing. I think that helps a lot too. So I would say with all of that, but one thing that I really have learned since being at MIT is that, mistakes are part of the process. Like, mistakes are not mistakes if you learn from them, or failures are not failures if you learn from them. Because, if you think of like researchers and scientists, they're doing things all the time. They're like trying this, they're trying that, they're trying that. There's so many experiments that fail until like 30 years later something works, and they make this like or along the way they make this huge discovery. So it's just a part of it. It's like, so I mean, I'm not talking about huge, like not, don't do something incredibly offensive, I mean, not those types of mistakes, but like sometimes typos they always get through. Or try something new. If it doesn't work, it's okay, no one will remember. Try something else. So it's constant experimentation. That's what the job is, and it's all part of it.
Yeah, I like that. And yes, you can learn and you can read up on it, but I also like your practical approach to it. I remember Gary Vaynerchuk talking about that ages ago, many years ago, that when a new app comes out, you just download it, you get to the bottom of it, you figure it all out. I mean, you're obviously an early adopter in that area to really get to the nuance of how it works. And it's interesting, isn't it? If you said you had that many apps to, I suppose, the average person, they go, wow, that's a lot. But for somebody in your role, the other end so might be, is that all? So
Yeah.
it depends on where you're coming at the question from, doesn't it?
100%. I just
Yeah,
was really surprised at the response.
yeah,
I'm like, I didn't realize that was a lot. I
yeah,
don't
it's
know. Yeah.
brilliant. Yeah. Next thing, Jenny, I want to ask you is about throughout your life, there must be people that you admire or people that have inspired you or give you a helping hand along the way. When I ask you that question, what springs to mind?
Yeah, I know. So I don't know if this is like super, I don't know if it's corny, but the women in my family um are, I mean, I feel like they really carried us on their backs, and sometimes like literally, like quite literally. And so I think of my maternal grandmother and my mother, and um yeah, like how, like I could go into it, but they made this all like possible for me to have these opportunities, and to be at MIT and to be able to write a book. And so like I feel like I have a lot to live up to, right? And so, and I want to make things better for my daughter, and have so that she could have more opportunities. And um so yeah, those are sort of
I
my
really like
heroes
that. And it's funny, I
of
was
my
talking to
life.
somebody only recently who was also saying their grandmother, and not many people do, but it's amazing how even if you go back one or two generations, people didn't have the same opportunities that we have today. They certainly didn't have the technology we have today, but they still made progress. They still enabled us, didn't they, to move and to grow and to expand as human beings. And there's an awful lot of both a sharing of knowledge, wisdom, education, and culture, and how we act. And I think we get a lot of that through our mothers, our grandmothers, and our close family members. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Jenny. What about advice?
AI doesn't have that kind of history.
Right, right. Not yet. What about advice, Jenny? What about advice that you've received along the way? Now, that could be family advice, or it could be, career advice. Have you received advice that you share with people on a regular basis, or is there any advice you can share with our worldwide audience that you think is important to know?
I mean, there's so been given so many so much advice. I think for me, I tend to be really, or my nature is to be really reactive. And I think social media managers, because maybe we have personalities that make us really enjoy these spaces and like these spaces, we tend to like think, our brains are always thinking and we want to react. And I think that, I was fortunately been told throughout my life, like from different people, like just breathe. Just count to 10, breathe, and no matter how urgent or how big something seems, it's not the end of the world, and you can kind of just think things through a little bit more. So I think just to not be so reactive. And also, like, I literally there was one mentor of mine that said, you're holding on so tight to everything, because I think, because we have a way of wanting to control everything, like we're perfect, a lot of us are perfectionists. And and she literally had her fist up like this, and she's like, just loosen your grip a little bit, like remember, there are things that happen that aren't in our control, and if we give them if we give them too much power, it's not good for your mental health. It's not good. it's just not good. So I
Yeah.
think that's been really great too, is just to be like, okay, just, I'll even like say to myself, Jenny, just loosen your grip a little bit. And,
Yeah.
it's really okay, so,
Great
yeah.
advice. It's great advice, Jenny. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about people involved in the social media world as you are? You obviously have to do the real-time interactions that we were talking about earlier, but you also plan content too. But when it comes to your life, your career, the next book, whatever you're working on, how does planning work for you, Jenny? What's the next 6, 9, 12 months look like? How do what's on your horizon? How do you plan? How do you go about that?
Yeah. So I've done a big 180 in this. Like early on, I graduated from college. I had like a 5-year plan. I had a 10-year plan. Like I had like goals, and it it doesn't always happen according to plan. And I've learned that sometimes it happens better than you have ever planned it. So like I think like I'm always thinking about the next thing, like what is like but I don't it's kind of like what interests me or what makes me happy, or what piques my curiosity, like what is that next thing. So I take it from there. So and this is a question I've been asking myself a lot, because I am like the director of social media strategy at MIT. There's no like next obvious step for me, because I'm sort of at the peak of what I position, not of what I do, but like, as in like job description, right? So I've been thinking about that a lot. And I think that's where it comes to like, I'm one of the senior members in the room of social media. So we're sort of all in this space where do we take this next? Or how do we open the possibilities up for those coming up after us? I take this very seriously, right? So I think it could go a number of ways. I'm just like looking into what interests me at the moment, or what I want to do. Like I still love the aspect of building communities, so we'll see. But it's like, as I was sort of having these conversations with myself, and I was talking to people who I found very interesting, and I was having conversations with them about like, what do you do? What's your job? What's your day to day? And then like, some of those folks, I'm like, oh, I do not want to do that, but, and so you find that out. But other people, you're like, oh, that's interesting. But along that way, like all sort of signs, all the universe was telling me this, you're going to write a book. And so, so this is, I feel like, is happening now. And then we'll see where that leads. I think this is sort of my next step is the book is coming out in December, and we'll sort of see where that goes. And I'm just going to sort of take a break for a while, because like in the space of last year, like we bought a house, we moved, we sold a house, I wrote a book. I'm telling a lot of my friends, I'm like, no major life challenges for like at least 3 years. Like I'm just gonna I'm just gonna like sort of enjoy the moment.
That's why you were, just for people who are only listening in audio and not watching us in video, that's probably why you were shaking your head no when I mentioned another book.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I was like, I don't think so. Not in the works, not at least
yeah,
soon. Yeah.
yeah. No, that's great. And it's interestingly, because when it comes to planning, you sort of talk about doing that. You've done a 180, and you've almost loosened your grasp a little bit, and you're finding that that is also leading to better outcomes at times. So that's an
Yeah.
interesting
That
take. So thank you.
What a great way to pull that back. But yes, it has been it has exceeded, what I could have planned for myself.
Lovely. I like that, Jenny, a lot. So listen, before we wrap up, I want to squeeze in 2 quick questions. Number one is there anything that we've spoken about that you want to expand upon, or is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to leave our audience with today, or any final messages? And secondly, and importantly, if people want to reach out and connect with you, find out more about MIT, find out about the book, obviously, where's the best place to point people towards, Jenny?
I like to mentor a lot of people, and I take that very seriously, and I think it's really important, especially young women and young Asian women. I really think we're all in this together, and I like to further their careers because I've had help along the way myself. But also, like, you know, this book is sort of a culmination of like all of the conversations and the things that they've asked me and the things that that seem to have resonated in presentations I've given and classes that I've taught, and so I know that I can't mentor everyone, but if you had ever thought that I had said anything interesting, or if you ever had wanted to be mentored by me, maybe like, this is sort of the way to like start that journey. But I am in all the social spaces, probably the ones that you haven't heard of. But LinkedIn is a great way to just you can just message me, and I'm also on X, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram. I'd say those three spaces I'm the most active in currently, but you can also find me in Threads. I'm there too. But yeah.
Well, that's great. And that brings us nicely to the end of our time today and to the end of this episode on the global discussion with Jenny Li Fowler, the Director of Social Media at MIT. Make sure that you check out Jenny's book, which is Organic Social Media, How to Build Flourishing Online Communities, a great read for anybody involved in this space at all. Thank you to everybody who's been watching or listening to both Jenny and I from around the world. And make sure that you like, follow, subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support this podcast. And I hope that you'll join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers like Jenny. So thank you, Jenny. It's been such a wonderful pleasure to talk to you today.
It's been such a great conversation. Thank you, Simon.